In a cozy upscale restaurant tucked away in the city's busy heart, the evening was unfolding like any other. The place had an air of quiet elegance, dim lights, soft chatter, and the clinking of wine glasses. The kind of place where rich businessmen and celebrities gathered to unwind after a long day. But as usual, it wasn't just the gourmet meals that drew attention tonight. At the center of the room sat a table with a few well-dressed men, their laughter bouncing off the walls. One of them, a man in his late 40s, stood out. His name was Richard, and he was a regular at this restaurant. Richard was wealthy, brash, and loved to joke around. He wasn't the type to sit quietly at a table. He liked to be the center of attention. He had a reputation for making light of situations and often pushed the boundaries just to entertain himself. Tonight, Richard and his friends were enjoying their usual round of drinks. They were deep in conversation when his eyes wandered over to the waitress who was bringing a tray of drinks to a nearby table. She moved with grace, but her eyes were focused and her posture was calm. There was something about her that caught his attention, something quiet yet confident. Richard leaned back in his chair and turned to his friends with a playful smirk. "Hey, look at her. I bet she's never touched a piano in her life," he said, nodding toward the waitress. The men around him laughed, and one of them raised an eyebrow. "What makes you say that?" Richard, ever the jokester, shrugged. "I don't know. Just a hunch. She seems like the type who'd rather carry a tray than play Chopin." The table laughed again. Richard wasn't being mean. It was all part of the fun. He loved making wild assumptions and seeing where they'd go. But what happened next was entirely unplanned. Sophie, the waitress, had just finished serving a table and was walking past when she heard Richard's comment. She didn't say anything, just kept moving, but her face turned slightly red. She'd heard jokes about her before, but Richard's comment stung more than the usual. She wasn't a stranger to being underestimated. In fact, most people assumed she was just another waitress. What they didn't know was that Sophie had a talent that no one had ever given her the chance to show off. Richard, still in his joking mood, looked at Sophie as she walked by and waved her over. "Hey, you!" he called out. Sophie stopped in her tracks and turned, trying to keep her cool. "Yes, sir? How can I help?" Richard grinned, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "I'll tell you what. I'll bet you $50 that you can't play piano like I think you can." "I bet you've never even touched a keyboard." Sophie was taken aback. She wasn't sure if he was serious or just making another one of his jokes. She had no intention of playing into it. But Richard, always persistent when it came to his humor, leaned back in his chair and continued. "Come on, I've seen it all. Fancy businessmen, waiters who think they're performers. But I'd be willing to bet you're no virtuoso." Sophie stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of his words. She didn't know how to respond. She had never thought of herself as a performer, and certainly not someone who could impress anyone with her musical skills. For as long as she could remember, her talent had been a secret, something she kept to herself. It wasn't that she didn't want people to know. She just didn't think they would care. But now Richard was challenging her in front of everyone. Sophie felt a wave of hesitation. She could hear Richard's friends chuckling in the background. They were already placing bets, wondering whether she'd take him up on his offer or not. It was harmless, they thought. Just a game, her mind raced. She'd played piano for years, ever since she was a little girl. It was her escape, her comfort. But it was a part of herself she never shared with anyone. The thought of sitting at a piano in front of a crowd with Richard and his friends watching her made her nervous. What if she wasn't good enough? What if they all laughed at her? But then Sophie thought about the charity she supported, a music program for underprivileged kids. She had always wanted to give more, to do more for them, but she hadn't been able to. Maybe this was her chance. Maybe, just maybe, this challenge could turn into something bigger. "Okay," Sophie said, her voice steady but soft. "I'll do it. But only if you really mean it. If I do this, you'll donate the money to a music program for kids. No backing out." Richard's eyes widened with surprise, clearly impressed by her response. He hadn't expected her to agree, let alone make such a serious condition. But the idea intrigued him. He hadn't anticipated this taking such a turn. "Deal," he said quickly, trying to hide the excitement in his voice. "I'll donate and I won't back out. But you better be good." Sophie nodded and turned toward the back of the restaurant where an old grand piano sat, tucked in the corner near the bar. The restaurant had a live music setup, though it wasn't often used. Most of the time it was just there for decoration. Sophie felt the eyes of the room follow her as she walked past the tables, her heart pounding in her chest. She was used to people staring when she moved through the restaurant, but this felt different. This was a challenge. She wasn't just walking to the kitchen to refill water glasses. She was walking to face something much bigger. When she reached the piano, she paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and sat down. The keys felt cold beneath her fingers. She hadn't played in front of an audience in years. Sophie hesitated for a moment, her hands hovering above the piano, unsure of where to begin. But then she thought of the kids she hoped to help. They deserved better than just empty promises. She would do this for them. She would play with all the passion she had inside her, whether she was ready or not. As she pressed the first key, a gentle melody began to fill the room. Sophie closed her eyes, letting the music flow through her. She had no idea what she was going to play, but the music seemed to take over, guiding her fingers across the keys. The sounds were soft at first, unsure, but soon they became more confident. She played a song that came from deep within her, a piece she had learned as a child. At first, Richard and his friends were just humoring her, waiting for the inevitable awkward moment when she would stumble. But as the seconds passed, something unexpected happened. Sophie's fingers moved faster, her playing more fluid. The room, once full of chatter, grew quiet as everyone began to notice. People stopped talking. Even the waitstaff paused their work to listen. The only sound was the piano, echoing in the space, weaving its way into everyone's hearts. Richard leaned forward in his chair, his playful smirk replaced by a look of genuine surprise. This wasn't just any piano performance. Sophie wasn't just playing. She was pouring her heart into the music, and it was impossible not to feel the emotion behind each note. What started as a joke had turned into something far more powerful than anyone had expected. Sophie didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The music had a life of its own, and as her fingers moved across the keys, she felt like she was finally, truly, letting something of herself out into the world. For the first time in a long while, she didn't care who was watching, and little did she know this moment, this challenge, would change everything. As Sophie's fingers continued to dance over the keys, the room around her seemed to disappear. The soft notes she played filled the restaurant, swirling through the air and touching the hearts of everyone who heard them. It was as if the piano had become an extension of herself, and every note was a part of her story, her emotions, and her dreams. The crowd, which had once been loud and boisterous, had fallen silent. Richard, who had once thought this was just a silly challenge, now sat at the edge of his seat, completely captivated. Sophie wasn't aware of the shift in the room. She was lost in the music, a place where she always felt most herself. For so long she'd kept this talent hidden away, afraid that if she shared it, it wouldn't be good enough. But as she played, she realized that the music wasn't about impressing anyone. It wasn't about proving something. It was simply about feeling free, about expressing herself in the most honest way she knew how. With each passing second, the atmosphere in the restaurant changed. The guests who had been eating and talking were now drawn to the sound. Some stood up from their tables, quietly moving toward the piano. Others leaned forward, their attention completely fixed on Sophie. It was as if the entire world had stopped to listen. Richard, who had initially expected a quick, awkward performance, was now stunned. He leaned in closer to his table, his eyes wide with disbelief. Sophie wasn't just playing a simple tune. She was playing with a depth and emotion that left him speechless. He had thought she was just another waitress, someone who spent her days serving food and drinks. He hadn't expected this kind of talent. But now, as he listened, he realized just how wrong he had been. As Sophie's fingers moved across the keys, she felt the music start to build. It was a feeling she had known all her life, the way music could connect with her heart, express what words could never say. She wasn't just playing notes anymore. She was telling a story. The piece was one she had practiced many times, but tonight it felt different. It felt like it was meant to be shared with everyone in the room. Her confidence grew with every passing note. The sounds from the piano were soft at first, gentle and almost shy, but as Sophie played, they became more powerful, filled with emotion. It was as if each chord carried a weight of its own. The restaurant, which had been busy and filled with noise just moments ago, was now holding its breath. The only sound was the beautiful melody coming from the piano. Richard's friends, who had been joking around just moments before, were now quiet. They exchanged glances, surprised by the transformation. What started as a joke had turned into something extraordinary. One of Richard's friends, who had been laughing the loudest earlier, now looked at Richard in silence, his face reflecting the same awe. They hadn't expected this. No one had. Sophie kept playing, her mind racing. She was nervous, of course. Who wouldn't be? But the more she played, the less she cared about the people watching. The music was everything. It was as if she was giving them a glimpse into her soul, and in return they were listening, really listening. The applause came suddenly. Sophie had finished the piece, and before she could even look up, the entire room erupted in applause. She froze for a second, not quite sure how to respond. Her hands hovered above the piano keys as the crowd clapped and cheered. It was overwhelming. Richard was the first to stand up. "That was incredible," he called out, his voice full of genuine admiration. His friends followed suit, clapping and nodding in approval. Sophie's face flushed red. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, but as she looked up, she saw the expressions of amazement on the faces around her. She had done it. She had truly done it. As the applause slowly died down, Richard approached the piano, his steps slow and deliberate. He looked at Sophie with a mixture of surprise and respect. He had seen a lot of things in his life, but this was unexpected. "You were amazing," Richard said, his voice sincere. "I didn't know. I really didn't know." Sophie smiled shyly, still processing the whirlwind of emotions that had just taken place. "Thank you," she replied softly. She wasn't sure how to respond to his compliment. She was still trying to believe it herself. "I was wrong about you," Richard continued, his tone now more serious. "I made a joke earlier, but you're incredible. That was not what I was expecting." Sophie nodded, feeling a little embarrassed but also proud. "I don't usually play in front of people. It's just something I do for myself." Richard gave a knowing look. "I get that. But you should share your talent. People would appreciate it. You've got something special, Sophie." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to say that. She had always kept her music to herself, afraid of what others might think. But here, in this moment, surrounded by strangers and friends alike, she realized Richard was right. She had something that others could appreciate, something that wasn't just for her alone. As she stood up from the piano bench, Sophie felt a mix of emotions. She was still overwhelmed by the attention, but there was something else too. A feeling of liberation, of having let go of a part of herself she had kept hidden for so long. For the first time in a long while, she felt proud of who she was. Richard smiled at her, his eyes warm. "I'll make that donation," he said, his voice firm. "To the music program you mentioned. And I'll make sure it's a generous one." "You deserve it," Sophie blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected that. The challenge had been a joke, but Richard's offer felt real. He wasn't just offering a donation. He was offering her the chance to help others. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaking a little. "That means a lot to me." Richard smiled again, his usual playful demeanor replaced with something deeper. "You don't have to thank me. You earned it. And if you ever want to pursue music further, I'll help you. I know a few people who could get you into some of the best programs. You've got a gift, Sophie. Don't hide it." Sophie felt a lump form in her throat. She didn't know what to say. She had never imagined that a simple evening at work would turn into something so life-changing. A part of her still felt like she was dreaming. As the night went on, the energy in the room shifted. What had started as a joke had turned into something real and meaningful. Sophie had shared her talent, and in return, she had not only earned the respect of a wealthy millionaire, but also opened a door to a future she had never considered. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. The crowd slowly returned to their meals, but the mood was different. People were talking about the unexpected performance they had witnessed, and Sophie couldn't help but smile to herself. She had done it. She had faced her fears and let the music speak for her. As she walked back to the kitchen after her performance, Sophie felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she knew that things had changed. That night, she had taken the first step toward something new. And no matter where it led, Sophie knew she was no longer just the quiet waitress. She was a musician, and for the first time in a long time, that felt enough.